At 6:19 in the morning on November 11th, 2025, about 140 nautical miles north of Venezuela's coast, the USS Gerald R. Ford moved steadily through the Caribbean. On deck sat more than 75 combat aircraft, and over 4,000 sailors were already at their stations. Then the radar operators noticed something unusual. Two fast contacts appeared on the screens, approaching at roughly 430 knots. They were flying low, no transponders, no radio contact. The aircraft were Venezuelan, and they were heading straight toward nearly $100 billion worth of American naval power. The situation was strange from the start. 4 Venezuelan fighter jets, together worth less than $200 million, were about to challenge the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built. But they weren't carrying live weapons. Their payload was cameras. The confrontation that followed would be recorded in high definition and spread across the internet before the day was over. At 6:15, the Ford's powerful radar systems detected the first contact at a bearing of 285 degrees, about 62 nautical miles away. The aircraft was descending quickly from 8,000 feet. 23 seconds later, a second contact appeared on the display, flying in loose formation roughly 3 miles away. Both aircraft were moving directly toward the carrier. The radar signatures identified them as twin-engine fighters. Their radar cross-section and flight profile matched Venezuelan Su-30 MKV aircraft. No fire control radar, no missile guidance signals, no weapon systems active, only navigation radar and encrypted communications. In other words, they weren't preparing to attack. Rear Admiral Patricia Chen, commanding the strike group, had to make a decision that would define the next several minutes. The Ford and its escorts had overwhelming firepower. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanked the carrier, each equipped with dozens of vertical launch missile cells. The cruiser USS Gettysburg held position nearby. The combat system automatically suggested an intercept. 4 SM-2 missiles could be launched from 50 nautical miles away with a very high probability of destroying the aircraft. Admiral Chen chose another option. Stand by all weapons systems. Weapons tight, launch the alert fighters. Weapons tight meant the strike group could track targets but could not fire unless a direct threat was confirmed. The ship's missile launchers stayed in standby. Interceptors remained in their tubes. The carrier group wasn't defenseless. It was deliberately choosing restraint. At 6:17, 2 FA-18E Super Hornets launched from the Ford's electromagnetic catapult system, accelerating from 0 to roughly 165 miles per hour in just over 2 seconds. Both fighters carried a full air-to-air loadout. Together, they were worth more than $140 million. The 2 approaching Venezuelan jets cost far less. But this moment wasn't about price. It was about perception. At 6:19, the Venezuelan fighters dropped below 2,000 feet, descending rapidly. Intelligence confirmed them as Su-30 MKV aircraft delivered to Venezuela under a multi-billion-dollar defense deal. Their weapon pylons were empty. Thermal sensors showed cold hardpoints. No missiles, no bombs, no gun pods. Instead, high-resolution camera equipment had been mounted where weapons normally hung. The aircraft were flying aggressively, but their purpose was clear. They were filming. 2 minutes later, radar detected something else. 2 additional aircraft appeared from a different direction. Now 4 Venezuelan jets were approaching the strike group, forcing the defenders to split their attention between 2 vectors. Admiral Chen remained calm. All stations maintain weapons tight. Launch 2 additional Hornets. General quarters. The ship's alarm sounded across the carrier. Sailors rushed to their assigned stations. Destroyers shifted position to cover wider angles of approach while the cruiser adjusted its defensive screen. Everything the strike group did, every movement, every radar sweep, was being recorded by the cameras aboard the Venezuelan jets. At 6:23, the first dramatic maneuver began. The lead Su-30 rolled sharply to the left, its wing rising vertically before the aircraft inverted and pitched downward. The jet dove toward the carrier. Angle of descent, more than 40 degrees. Closure speed, over 500 knots. Every defensive system aboard the Ford locked onto the aircraft instantly. Missile launchers rotated into alignment. Close-in weapon systems tracked the target with their radar and infrared sensors. For several seconds, the Venezuelan pilot flew directly into the heart of the most advanced naval air defense network in the world, and nothing fired. Admiral Chen kept the same order in place. Weapons tight. The Su-30 leveled out only about 400 meters from the carrier, close enough that sailors on deck could clearly see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. The blast of jet wash shook loose equipment on the deck and rattled sensors across the ship. One sailor later said he could read the aircraft's identification markings as it passed. Moments later, the second jet performed the same maneuver, this time even closer. The pressure from the aircraft's wake triggered automatic fire suppression sensors inside the hangar bay below deck. At 6:25, the second pair of Venezuelan jets split formation. One climbed high above the fleet. The other dropped to barely 300 feet above the water. The high-flying jet rolled into a dive, this time toward the destroyer USS Thomas Hudner. The low-flying jet accelerated toward the carrier's stern, racing between ships at an altitude that would normally trigger every safety warning in naval aviation. Defensive systems tracked the aircraft instantly. The Aegis radar locked on, fire control solutions appeared, and the combat computers recommended 6 intercept missiles. Probability of success, 99%. Estimated cost, $12.6 million. Admiral Chen didn't change her order. Hold fire. The aircraft roared past the carrier's stern at barely 280 meters. Above, the second jet pulled out of its dive roughly 500 meters above the destroyer USS Thomas Hudner. Moments later, all 4 Venezuelan fighters regrouped, formed a diamond formation, and turned south toward home. From the first radar contact to the moment they departed, the entire encounter lasted just 17 minutes. No weapons were fired, but the cameras had captured everything. Within less than an hour, edited footage began appearing on Venezuelan state television. The broadcast claimed the country's air force had forced an American carrier to withdraw under the threat of attack. Clips of the jets diving toward the massive ship spread rapidly online. Within a day, the video had millions of views across social media platforms throughout Latin America. The narrative was simple and dramatic: small Venezuelan fighters confronting the world's most powerful warship. But the recorded data told a different story. Ship tracking systems showed the USS Gerald R. Ford never changed course or speed. The carrier strike group continued its patrol exactly as planned. Over the next 4 days, the group passed within 12 nautical miles of Venezuela's coastline multiple times while continuing flight operations without interruption. None of that appeared in the viral video. From Washington's perspective, the incident demonstrated how easily military events can be turned into information warfare. The Pentagon described the Venezuelan maneuvers as unsafe and unprofessional, but confirmed that no defensive engagement was required. In practical terms, the Venezuelan aircraft achieved their objective, footage. But the situation was far more complicated than a simple flyby. At the time, Venezuela's economy was under severe pressure. Years of sanctions, economic contraction, and inflation had created widespread hardship. Political tensions inside the country were rising, and the government needed something that could shift the national conversation. A dramatic confrontation with the United States offered exactly that opportunity. A viral video costs nothing in ammunition, but it can carry enormous political value. Within 3 days, the footage had been viewed tens of millions of times. Officials in Caracas praised the pilot's actions as proof of military readiness and national pride. For a brief period, public sentiment inside the country shifted toward patriotic support. For the United States, the calculation looked different. Shooting down unarmed aircraft would have triggered an international crisis. The crash of a fighter near populated coastal waters could have caused civilian casualties. Diplomatically, it would have dominated headlines for weeks, and politically, it would have given the Venezuelan government something even more powerful than a video: martyrs. By choosing not to fire, the carrier group accepted the short-term propaganda loss while avoiding a much larger escalation. The Gerald R. Ford remained on station and continued its mission. The Venezuelan pilots returned to Generalissimo Francisco de Miranda Air Base and were celebrated as heroes. State media broadcast interviews and official commendations. 8 weeks later, the carrier returned to Norfolk. There were no headlines about the decision not to fire, no medals for holding position, no public recognition for restraint, but restraint can sometimes be the most difficult choice in military command. Launching weapons is straightforward. Choosing not to launch them while fully capable of doing so requires a different kind of discipline. It means weighing long-term consequences against short-term reactions. It means recognizing that modern conflict is often fought as much through information and perception as through missiles and bombs. At 6:42 that morning, Admiral Chen stood on the flag bridge watching the horizon as the carrier continued northeast at 22 knots. Flight operations resumed. Escort ships returned to their patrol patterns. Far away in Caracas, video editors were already preparing the next clip. The encounter revealed something important about both sides. For Venezuela, the gamble delivered a short-term propaganda victory, but it also exposed the risks behind the maneuver. If the carrier group had chosen to respond with force, the 4 fighters would likely have been destroyed within seconds. Their dive maneuvers placed them in extremely vulnerable positions with no defensive weapons and no standoff capability. Their survival depended entirely on the expectation that the United States would not escalate. For the United States, the moment illustrated the limits of traditional deterrence in the digital era. The Ford carried overwhelming firepower, yet that power alone could not prevent an unarmed flyby designed purely for cameras. Deterrence works best when both sides fear the same consequences. In this case, one side was chasing a strategic narrative. And in the age of viral footage, sometimes the story spreads faster than the facts. Intelligence analysts later pointed out that the encounter wasn't unique. It matched a pattern that has appeared repeatedly in modern military standoffs. Chinese fighters intercept reconnaissance aircraft over the South China Sea. Russian jets shadow NATO patrol planes over the Baltic. Iranian speedboats circle Western ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The playbook is simple. Fly close, film everything, release the footage first, claim victory regardless of what actually happened. The goal is rarely to win a military engagement. The goal is to win the narrative. This shift reflects a broader change in strategy. In direct confrontation, smaller powers would almost certainly lose against a carrier strike group. But in the information space, the balance can look very different. A single dramatic video can reshape domestic opinion, energize political allies, and create the impression that a larger military power hesitated. In other words, the target isn't the ship, it's the algorithm. When the USS Gerald R. Ford eventually returned to Norfolk, the flyby incident had already faded from most American news coverage. Meanwhile, Venezuelan state television continued replaying the footage for weeks. Some broadcasts claimed the flyby proved U.S. carriers were vulnerable. Others suggested American ships had backed away. Neither claim matched the operational record. Ship tracking data showed the carrier never altered course or speed, and the strike group continued its patrol throughout the region. But in information warfare, perception often spreads faster than facts. The numbers behind the event were almost ironic. Venezuela fired no weapons and spent nothing on ammunition. In return, it gained millions of views and a wave of domestic attention. The United States also fired no weapons and maintained its patrol mission exactly as planned. One side gained a viral video. The other side maintained freedom of navigation and avoided escalation. Which side won depends entirely on how victory is defined. For the U.S. Navy, the episode reinforced an important principle. Military strength is not only about firepower, it's also about the ability to stay on mission under pressure, to absorb provocation without losing control of the situation, and to make decisions based on long-term consequences rather than momentary reactions. The Ford demonstrated that the most advanced weapon systems in the world still rely on human judgment about when not to use them. But the Venezuelan pilots demonstrated something else. In the age of social media, you don't necessarily need to destroy a carrier to challenge it. Sometimes it's enough to create the appearance that you could have. You don't need cutting-edge weapons to challenge a powerful military presence. Cameras, timing, and a willingness to take risks can create an image that travels much farther than any missile. Hardware can be countered with more hardware. Narratives are harder to counter. By the time the cameras turned off and the ships continued their patrols, the silent mathematics of naval power had shifted slightly. Staying on station still matters when weapons are involved, but now it also matters when the cameras are rolling. And sometimes the hardest battle to win is the one where no shots are fired. If you found this analysis interesting, consider subscribing and sharing the video so more people can understand how modern military encounters are increasingly shaped not only by technology, but also by information and perception.